Hello everyone and welcome to the next episode of the Belinda Carr Show. Today we're going to be talking about staining and painting bricks and other masonry too.
So that's a very specific topic, and that's something that you've wanted to make a video on for a while now.
Yeah, it is. Over the last 5 years or so, we've seen this farmhouse trend pop up where everyone wants to paint their homes white.
You think Chip and Joanna are to blame for that?
Probably.
Them and HGTV.
And I get it because bricks can vary a lot. Like when they age, they don't really look the best, but they serve a particular purpose. They have a very specific function, and painting them just for appearances can affect their functioning in a really scary way.
So from a novice's perspective that doesn't really know architecture, they would assume that the brick is actually structural to the building.
It's purely like a rain screen, basically.
It is porous. It lets moisture through, so there has to be this air barrier behind it for it to drain.
And people don't understand that. They just think it's a surface that it's like drywall on the inside, paint it any color you want. It's not going to affect the performance. But it doesn't function like drywall on the inside.
Yes, because paint is an air barrier.
If you use the wrong type of paint, yes, it can act like an air barrier. And when this painted brick trend started a couple of years ago, people weren't using the right type of product, and they were basically locking in any moisture that was behind the brick and preventing it from escaping. And that can cause serious mold and mildew issues and rot to the substrate behind the brick.
It goes back to the idea of renovating your old home with new technologies. You have to be familiar with how the building was intended to perform. Like these older homes were intended to be able to breathe. Therefore, renovating with something like spray foam might not be the best idea.
So there are a lot of people that get angry with me in the YouTube comments if I say something like that, like houses are meant to breathe. But when I say that, I mean that, or we mean that the house works as a system. Like changing one component is going to have an effect on the others. Like, we're not saying that leaky homes are a good thing. We're saying that if you put closed cell spray foam in an old building, but don't change your HVAC system, don't look at how many air changes are occurring inside the building, that's where you're going to have an issue. You have to think of it as a system. There are two reasons why I hate painted white bricks. One, because you're changing the way the brick performs. And two, because it looks terrible after a couple of years. Like, brick has this patina to it and has these variations. So if a certain part of the brick, like the lower part of your building, gets discolored, it's not as noticeable because there are overall variations in your building. But when it's all painted white, dust accumulates in the grooves and it's very noticeable.
Our house, for example, it does not have gutters and drains. Therefore, the water just comes right off the roof and it splashes and hits the brick. And so we have some darker spots, which can be cleaned off. But if you paint it bright white, then that's really going to stick out.
So you also have to make sure that you have gutters and downspouts installed and all the water is not splashing back on your brick and is drawn away from the building. You can't just paint your brick and then walk away from it and say it's going to magically change the appearance of my building now and I'm done.
It's one of those flipped home features that people like. They want all their walls painted. They want their countertops white.
That you talked about a TikTok we watched, right, recently?
Oh, yeah. The TikTok was about 10 things that people believe add value to their home. And they were all these essential things like water heater, your air conditioning unit, new windows, things like that do affect the performance of your home. And if you're really knowledgeable about your home functions, yeah, you might think that it increases the value of your home. But in reality, 90% of people just want an updated kitchen and bathroom that's white. And that's all they want, and they're happy.
That's unfortunately the truth. That's what we're trying to change here.
So a company actually reached out to you that stains brick and concrete, and their product actually looks just as good as the painted brick look while being a stain and performing well.
Yes, the company's name is Nawkaw, and they're based in Athens, Georgia. The name's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, you don't really think of stained brick whenever you hear the word Nawkaw, but hopefully they grow in the future and they will be synonymous with that.
They'll be the Kleenex of brick stains. So they invited us to their facility in Athens, Georgia, and we got to learn a little bit more about their products and how they work. Hey everyone, today we're with Briggitte Emmons-Vega, Research and Development Specialist at Nawkaw here in Georgia. Thanks for having us, Briggitte.
Thank you for having me.
So what is Nawkaw? What products do they provide to customers?
So we are an architectural finishing company, and basically we take pride in the science and artistry of the stains that we provide, as well as the applicators that we train to be able to provide these amazing looks and finishes for everyone, for any concrete, masonry, UHPC, etc. type of look.
And for anyone watching the video, you might be able to see some samples in the background. So you'll work with masonry, different types of masonry, whether it's concrete or brick, and you'll apply different stains to it to achieve different looks. And it's both existing and new construction, and you'll work on commercial and residential projects too.
Yeah, we have a very wide scope. We can really achieve any kind of look for our customers, and we take great pride that we can do that for them.
So what's your role in the company?
So as research and development specialist, I do a lot of the testing for either our products, maybe some other products that customers want to see how we hold up against them. If they have a specific surface they're not sure if we can tackle, I'll go ahead and do testing for that as well. And on top of that, I do day-to-day research to improve our product. I come up, if there's any market we want to branch into, I'll research and see and maybe formulate an option for us as well. And I consistently try and improve our formulations with our Chief Science Officer, Kasha.
And you come from a chemistry background. You're using a lot of what you studied in college, you think, in your day-to-day work?
Yes. So typically everyone assumes like with paint, you have a lot of organic, I feel like, components in it, a lot of VOCs, things to watch out for. With our stains, we focus on mineral silicates. So it's a lot more inorganic chemistry. So I feel like I delve more into that chemistry than the organic side. So that's really where I pull from my chemistry background a lot, which is great. Things like FTIR and all that exposure that I got in school for chemistry.
And FTIR, sorry?
So basically it's like material science.
Okay.
So you can take, so if you know how you test something, like in chemistry, you can test a liquid, you can test a gas, and you can come up with its composition or an image of what it looks like. With FTIR, you can do that with solids, which makes it interesting. There's like specific ways that you can capture images of solids and material science, so you can get a better picture of what's going on, like inside of like concrete, for example, or brick. You could take a better understanding of how those molecules are interacting with each other, and maybe even a paint and stain, since it penetrates, get a better image of what's happening and how it changes the chemical composition of the actual.
And the reason is, so when you talk about chemical composition of solids, you're looking at high density concrete or glass reinforced concrete versus something like lightweight concrete. You're looking at how porous each material is, right?
With
because
FTIR?
No, like what you do day to day,
What I do day to day, yes, correct.
And then that porosity affects how well it takes stains, how it absorbs stains, and whether how much it soaks through, correct?
Yes and no, it's a combination. So our stain, it is penetrative, so it's very important, like you're correct, the capillaries in the pores, it'll penetrate into it and react. But what's also really important to consider is that it doesn't need to penetrate to form that chemical and permanent bond. So like you said, with the high density concrete, it might take longer, like you have to allow for a longer curing period because you're not penetrating into it, but those chemical permanent bonds will still form with our stain in the surface, which is what allows it to perform on higher density concrete that, might not accept water absorption of any kind, but we can still 100%, find a creative.
And then sometimes you all use primers too, right, to help with that mechanical bond.
A chemical bond, yes, yeah.
So paint is a mechanical bond, stain has a chemical bond.
Has the chemical permanent bond, yes, correct. Yeah, so yeah, we have a primer that for this high density, it still has some pores it just doesn't have as many. That's part of the appeal of it. So what the primer does is it gives a homogeneous absorption right across the entire surface, so you don't get splotchy looks, or it's accepted here but not over here. And what else it does is that it gives more of a surface for our stain to also chemically bind to. So while the primer is binding chemically to the surface and evening out any inconsistencies, our product is chemically bonding to the primer, which is chemically bonding to the surface, which means it's all chemically bonded together. So it's like a nice chain reaction. So
in your day-to-day work, do you have to constantly look at what the next material is out there? And the last when we spoke earlier, you said your work is challenging because you're approached with a different problem every day. Like clients want you to come up with a different kind of color, a different shade, a different appearance. And so is that what you do every day, is try to formulate this new stain that will fit the client's needs?
So kind of, yes. So yeah, when I do like the new colors and we're looking at opening up our color range, I would test and I'd look for fine pigments that chemistries would be compatible with the environment that our stains operate in, as well as they perform well, especially when exposed to UV lighting and weathering. That's also very important. So it's a combination of finding the perfect pigments that are going to last with long-term exposure, as well as finding them that will survive and blend well into our actual formulation.
Okay. And do you all have like a set formula, your secret sauce, and then you all add different pigments to it to achieve different colors?
Yes. So we have, when you find that optimum formula, you really don't want to mess with the secret too much. So yeah, we have, for each of our products, we have one that's optimal. Of course, we're always looking, if there's a better option, as new things come out, there's more innovation. We're always more than willing to test and swap things out to see if it does improve our already wonderfully performing product. And yeah, once we do that, we'll have it, we get it as a base. And then either here or at the manufacturer, they'll add whatever pigment we decide to add to it. And so we'll get it in our totes, and then we'll have a whole host of colors to pick from that way.
And down there in your lab, you have an accelerated UV testing machine.
Yes,
Can you
correct.
explain how that works?
So with the accelerated QUV machine, what it does is basically for us, we have our stain on the substrate.
Like brick or concrete?
Yeah, so we have what we call QUV panels. Okay. And we'll put the QUV panels with our whatever we're testing. So if we're testing new types of pigment, we'll put it into our base, put it on there, and then we'll obviously compare. We'll also put our current products in there and products that we use to make sure if it's performing better than the new pigments that we're testing out. So we'll put it on there. We'll close it up and we'll set it on cycles. So you can vary, it depends on the testing. It's just, important to follow the standard and make sure you're finding the one that works for you. For us, obviously, since it's UV, we're gonna use UV fluorescent lamps. And
so that's kind of mimicking natural sunlight, but it's like a concentrated version, so you're able to see how it stands up to make 20 years of exposure to the sunlight, right?
Correct. So there's no direct correlation for that testing, but what this is it's supposed to give us an idea of, in these intense conditions, how these pigments are going to react. And what you do is, when you do a QUV, you also want to as well do an outdoor weathering testing, which we're also setting up as well to continue with the ones that perform optimally in the QUV. We're going to put those outside as well for the natural weathering testing. Okay. And of course, there's a standard for that as well. And when you do is you compare it to kind of give yourself that timeline of, okay, how long and how much weathering can these samples take? And we test the UV light fastness, like I mentioned, how they hold up to long-term exposure to the UV. And because there's a condensation cycle, it also tests any kind of chalking, how they hold up. If any kind of chalking is going to happen after constant exposure to condensation, because rain's going to happen, especially when you're outdoors. So it's a factor to consider as well.
Have you all UV tested paint versus stain and seen how that performs, or do you all only test stain?
So we mainly only test stain because we're looking for our products themselves. There are QUV studies usually already done on paints. Usually the manufacturers do them themselves. It's a little harder to compare, because with a lot of what I found, especially when I'm looking for pigment data, they'll do it in like an acrylic base, and which is fine. but sometimes they'll do like a PVC coating on top of it, so almost like the pigment's protected, and that, you know, it's
So the
pretty
paint,
durable, PVC
so the
stuff.
paint itself is acrylic based, but then you're saying they put a protective coat over it and then test it, which is not
exactly what I want, you know, because I want to see how the pigments themselves hold up, not if they're protected by another film, because, you know, that binder maybe, you know, might be great, might give them a little bit of a longer, you know, life, just because it's absorbing a lot of the UV exposure from them. But it's also harder to ascertain what the damage is to the pigment, I feel like, because that coating's going to take most of the damage, so any damage you see could be absorbed by the coating, but a lot of the coatings they use are those very intense film formings like we talked about, very durable, similar to like epoxy that you would put on your floor. So they're highly durable, you know, they're not coming off, they're almost plastic. Yeah. And which is great, but as we see with plastic, it doesn't really, not a lot damages it, so you can't really...
It's not a fair comparison.
It's not a fair comparison, no. So when you have like our stains, because they penetrate, the pigment's more exposed. It's incorporated into the binder matrix, but it still has more exposure to UV than it would in an acrylic binder where it's protected.
Yeah. So speaking of epoxy, can you use stains on concrete floors, or do you all just use it on vertical surfaces, on walls?
So we prefer to apply stains to vertical flooring just because you don't have that mechanical damage that can come into play. So when you have your concrete flooring, you have people walking on it, things rolling, you know, things getting dropped and just chipping away at it. So it's not that our stain can't perform, it's that there's just a lot of other factors to consider when you have it on the horizontal as well.
So what's better for floors?
For floors, it's really hard to say. You know, it depends on where it's at, depends what the moisture content, what kind of
But that's indoor, outdoor too.
Exactly. Indoor, you're probably going to have more, you know, human foot traffic on it, versus outdoors, there's also the issue of moisture coming through the ground, up through it, and then, you know, you have
rain, snow.
Rain, exactly, and the de-icing materials that are just very harsh in general, and that naturally erode away at it. And since our stain, you know, binds into the first about 2-3 millimeters, it's bonded permanently to that substrate, but if the substrate's getting mechanically worn down, you're mechanically removing a permanent bond because, you know, it's literally chipping away and removing it, versus with paint where it just peels away, you know, and like gets rubbed off. Our stain only comes off because the floor itself is literally being removed. So I guess it really just depends kind of like what you want, you know, what kind of precautions you want to take, maintenance, and just as long as you're aware that it's not the stain that's failing when it's on the floor, it's just the mechanical erosion of the floor that's really the issue. So
with walls, after you all stain them, do you use any protective coating over it?
In terms like exterior, like when we just put up on the house? No. So our stains are, I'm not gonna say they're impervious to anything because they're not, but most climates, I want to say, you don't experience that type of weathering for years. So when we've put up stains that have 50 years later, or 25 years later, they've been up, but there's also places that have used just mineral silicate stains, the chemistry, and they've used the products before, and they've been around for 50 plus years, and they still look the same in terms of coloring, that, you know, as long as the pigments are light fast. They've bonded and they remain as long as, you know, like I said, the surface doesn't erode away. You're going to have a great result for years and years to come.
So let's talk a little bit about the iridescent stains that you'll have. When did you come up with this?
So these metallic stains,
it's metallic or iridescent?
This one's metallic specifically. So this one is actually our gold metallic. We do have that blue one up there that looks blue.
That's iridescent.
That's the iridescent one, yeah. So that one's pearlescent, and the chemistry is different. So this one is actually gold that we have, and it's in our mineral silicate base, and we apply it to the surface, and we get these nice metallic and glossy looks. What we're also looking to expand, though, is into the pearlescence, which gives you more of that iridescence, that almost pearl-like finish that you see, you know, the shimmer. That gives you a lot of options, and there's a lot. We're looking at a whole new line, and we're actually testing a bunch of them in our QUV to make sure we're getting ones with a stable chemistry that will respond well to constant exposure outdoors.
Okay. So do you come up with all the chemical formula behind all this, or do you all have other chemists?
So we have an old, it's not an old formula, it's formulas that we've had, you know, since the company And since I've been here, we've been working on optimizing it. So, you know, we have a few things that we are working on in terms of creating formulas and, you know, branching out and optimizing, like I said, like 3 times.
Yeah.
It's a fun word. But yeah, so my job is to find, you know, any new products that are coming out. Like if there's new types of coatings, you know, like I can't think of anything specifically, but if it's a new type of like look, I look and see if I can replicate it. I can come up with a formula that can give us the same look with the durability that ours offers.
So do you need to educate a lot of customers, mainly on the residential side, on the importance of staining their brick homes rather than painting them?
Yes, we find because it's not that it's new technology, it's just that the application techniques have only recently really been, you know, refined and honed. But a lot of, especially residential, even a lot of commercial, it's still, at least in the United States, it hasn't really like permeated the market in terms of knowledge and, you know, the upkeep and maintenance of brick. People, you know, that's very popular, just paint over. And you really don't want to do that. It's not good for the brick, you know, you set yourself up for really failure.
Have you seen projects where bricks have failed or a substrate behind it, like the plywood, a sheathing has failed, and you all had to come and clean up the brick, maybe replace it, and then stain it? To match the rest of the wall. Yeah, that is actually how Nawkaw actually got started. Our founder and CEO, Russell Gray, that was the bread and butter, as they like to call it. You know, they would have to replace bricks a ton, and then they would color match them for the rest of the wall so that they didn't have to go and try and find, because a lot of those brick manufacturers, you know, some of them have gone out of business or they don't produce that brick anymore for whatever reason. They come up with something better. And so, and also the issue with, you know, brick firing is that it can change color, even though, you know, because the deposits that they use to make it might be gone from one area, so they go to the next area, and it's not going to come out the exact same color. So we have found that is also an issue a lot. So by us coming in and just, you know, color matching it, there's less stress for them. It's better maintenance. It's better for the brick because they can still breathe and release any moisture that's trapped in it. Is historic preservation a part of what you do every day? People come to you with 100 or 150-year-old homes or buildings that need to be patched up and need to be matched with existing brick. Yeah, so I think especially in the Northeast, I want to say, that's something that we've seen a lot, you know, preservation and restoration is big, especially now with, you know, the new AIA 2030 architect movement. We're seeing a big push to, instead of building new, to renovate and preserve what you already have, which is great, you know. Some people might want to, you know, they don't like the color, or if they don't want to do like a complete restoration, but they can still preserve their house and keep it running, but they can change the look to kind of be more modern versus, but we did unfortunately, it burned down, I think, recently, but we did a project in Atlanta. I was over 25 years old, and we actually restored it. It was a historic restoration. I think it was the Martha. Yeah, oh, recent. No. That was one of the projects we'd have loved to like show you, like, but of course, you know, and which is I think it was over the pandemic. Okay. Is when that occurred, which is unfortunate. But it's one of the older projects. Not the oldest, I don't think, but it's one of the older projects that we'd done, and one of the first ones Russell was a big part of, and he was very proud of that project. So there's been a trend over the last 10 years or so, painting bricks white, painting homes white, siding, everything's white. Is that still a trend? Do you see it changing? We see a lot of monochrome. Yeah, a lot of that's still all white, a lot of black, maybe, you know, grays variation. But we don't see a lot of fun colors. I guess it's not that, you know, white and black isn't fun, but they're, you know, the bright and edgy colors aren't really as prevalent right now. We definitely see a lot more of the neutrals. Okay, beiges too sometimes, or light grays. There was one product you talked to me earlier about. It was like a slate. It was a dark gray concrete. Yeah, it was a form liner that's made to look like the stone. And that's really popular among architects and interior designers. It looks really nice, and they love it, and they keep the samples. So you all send out samples of all these finishes and products to interior designers? Yeah, so we had a material bank, which Rosie mentioned. And that's materialbank.com? It's a website? We will have to ask Rosie for that. I just know it's called Material Bank. She's in charge of that project, but yeah, she's our marketing director, and what they do is they basically house samples
And then in architects, I think residential homeowners can request samples of products on there that they like to see the tips and types of finishes. And on our little concrete samples, whether it's like a brick form line or wood form line or like the slate or just plain brick, they can pick which form liner they want, and they can pick what kind of design they want to see on it. And then we can have it sent to them at their warehouse, and they'll get it sent to their home or business, wherever they're at, and they can actually visually see this is what they can do, or I like this look, but can they change maybe this color? And then that's when they, maybe reach out to us.
But you all don't just send them the product itself and say, hey, just apply it on your own to your home, right? You all have
Correct.
Trained special applicators going to people's houses and projects and applying the stain, right?
Yeah, correct. Our applicators and technicians, they do a yearly training, and then they go through a rigorous training process that Mike Honeyman and Emmett and Steve Miller up in Canada, they're all, very involved in that to make sure that our technicians are trained, because like
it's
a lot of
not easy. I mean, there was a little setup downstairs, and there were 4 different stains, and I had to mix it and color match it with an existing sample, and I tried 3 different times.
Did you really?
I couldn't get it.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is.
When I tried it too, I just got yellow, and I was like, oh, I did not add enough colors. This is bad, because I use, my machines to help me make sure I'm getting on point and to get my formulas. And no, these technicians are trained, and then even applying it, it's a whole nother game. It's not like paint. Like, you use the same tools, but there's a certain finesse that you need to have to create these looks and knowing when to add more. And a lot of our technicians do it on site. Like, they look at the sample that our customer wants, and they look at the blank wall that they have set off for them to do a sample, and then they put it together.
So sometimes you set up, you give them certain samples, but then you give them freedom to change it on site?
Yeah, because something might happen, like because
the light may be different. Like,
yes.
each surface is,
and each surface doesn't cure the same, especially for concrete. When you have stain, especially if you're only doing one coat, that's sometimes also when you might need the primer as well, because if it's like Emmett mentioned earlier, going from light to dark is easier than going from dark to light. And so they need to know and see, like, okay, they want this color, like, that's easy. But then the technicians get there and they go, ooh, okay, well, it's going to require a little bit more work than you thought, or a little bit more product, because this is a darker color than what you said, or we only shown a portion of the wall, or like brick, all the colors are different. So each one needs to be matched exactly to give the same overall finish, and they know how to do that really well. And
they're basically artists on site.
Yes, yeah, we really couldn't do as well as we do without them.
Yeah. There's only so much you can do in a lab, and then you have
exactly.
They take it and make it happen. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what else are you going to be doing the rest of the year at the company? What's Nawkaw's future growth look like?
So we're expanding our current metallic offerings. Right now we have with our Nawkaw K formulation, which is our mineral silicate stain, we've actually expanded to include a water repellent option as well. That's new that we've just begun to introduce. So
all these aren't water repellent?
No, so naturally, because of the way silicate stains bind to concrete, they offer a little bit of water repellency because of the way it cures to the concrete.
Okay.
But we've added and improved the formula to make it more water repellent, so that when you compare, it's like, okay, now it's not a sealer, it's not preventing it. What it's doing is it's limiting the penetration of water into the surface, but it's still allowing it to escape, so it's not trapping it in there. Any moisture that's already in there can still escape.
That's tricky, because you don't want to clog up those pores. You still want to let the brick and masonry breathe, but you also want it to be water repellent.
Exactly. It's not that vapor barrier from one of your earlier videos. Watch that, which was really nice.
So what are your future plans?
So currently I'll be working on expanding our offerings. We have a few fun projects, me and Kasha, that we want to expand Nawkaw into. We're finishing up what we have now, obviously, making sure we're in an optimal position. And then I'm going to be here at the company for a very long time. I love working for it, so I don't see me leaving anytime soon.
And you get to experiment something new every day.
I do. I get a lot of freedom, and I get a great mentor, and it's just a great experience. So,
thank you so much, Briggitte. I really appreciate you inviting us to your facility and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you, of course, for having me.
And if people want to reach out to Nawkaw, do you all have an Instagram page?
We do. We have an Instagram page. We also have a LinkedIn, and
Website too.
and a website as well. On the website, there's emails for the R&D department for any questions, as well as
Samples, product samples.
product samples, any sales questions, anything you can find on any of those platforms.
Thanks again, Briggitte.
Yes, thank you.
So Nawkaw was a very welcoming company. I mean, from the moment we drove up, they made us feel like the most important people there. It was really cool. I mean, the company is really small. They've got a few offices around the world, but this one had about 15 to 20 people in it, and they set things up for us, and it was just a really welcoming experience.
Yeah, we have not visited many factories or companies. But the few that we have, this one really stood out among all of the others.
I feel like all the others are just 3D printing companies.
Yeah, but they, like you said, they were so welcoming and so kind, and they brought us had some breakfast and had some lunch prepared for us, and they answered all our questions. Just set aside the whole day for the tour. It was very sweet.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. You don't really think of like building a YouTube channel leads to us going to a factory where people make us feel really important. It's kind of crazy how it's been built to that.
Yeah, I really appreciated that. That is not lost on me, that how we've been able to grow and get to this point. It's very special, and I don't want to take it for granted.
Yeah, and we have a few more factory tours lined up in the future that we'll be doing podcast on as well.
Yeah, there's a lot we need to learn. Like the setup, the mic setup, the light setup, the questions we need to ask, and there's a lot we need to learn in this process. But that's the good thing, right? I mean, we try to get better with each interview. Like we did the first interview in Canada, then we did another interview somewhere else, and every time we visit these factories or companies, we try to get just a little bit better. And it's not perfect, but we're doing our best.
Yeah, one step at a time, and it will eventually become a polished product.
So apart from the product being really great and the people being really great, I think the one thing that really stood out to me was I was proven wrong. As an architect, we are always obsessed with the idea of being honest, and raw concrete is the best concrete. And we like Tarando's exposed, pre-stressed holes in the concrete. And
as architects, we are taught to hate any form of ornament. I mean, ornament's great for classical architecture, but when you're in architecture school, it's like learn classical architecture, but do modernist architect, do simple, do this crazy wild stuff that doesn't have any extra ornament or curves or anything like that.
Yeah, so the idea of making concrete look like wood or look like brick and then staining it, or making these polyurethane forms so that it actually makes the forms of brick, not just the appearance, but the actual shapes. So that's all being dishonest. But this factory tour changed my perception about that. Like, it made me appreciate their process and made me realize that there are very real use cases for products like that.
People don't want buildings that stick out.
And who are we as architects to tell them, no, your brick facade or your wood facade or something, that's wrong. You need solid, polished concrete and nothing else. Who are we to dictate that?
That's for each person to decide. And that's kind of an issue that comes up with affordable housing these days. All these architects make these attempts to create these affordable homes by just giving them cool colors or doing it through modular construction. And it's not what the people want. Those, like, they'll go to slums and try to build like that. And it's like, they don't want that. They want their own customized building. They kind of want to do it themselves.
And they want to blend in. That's my theory of shipping container, affordable houses. I made a video on that. And my theory is that those houses stand out. And when you're in that kind of financial situation, all you want to do is blend in. You want a house that looks like everyone else's houses, so people are not constantly pointing at your home and know that you are different.
Or like when it comes to the suburbs, you have all these homes built up and they're model homes, but people want their own unique twist to it, but they all want them to be pretty much the same. They don't want to be the oddball in the neighborhood.
So Nawkaw has a sister company that creates these polyurethane forms that concrete is poured into. And those are the ones that create these like wood shapes or brick shapes and all these different, maybe even like curved forms. They can go crazy with all the forms that they create out of polyurethane.
A good example of that, and this was not done by Nawkaw or this company, but just for the audience's perception, look up the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in Dallas, Texas, and that was created using these precast concrete panels where it was hundreds of different forms that were each unique, and they poured the concrete into them, and that's the exterior facade of the building.
So in this way, we're almost unlocking another side to concrete. Like, we don't have to think of this as cheating. It can be taking the next step in concrete facades. So take tilt wall buildings, for example. They're an extremely efficient method of construction. They're super fast, pretty well insulated, and they're a really good invention.
I always remember I used to drive to work the same road, and it was in this like factory part of town where they were building all these tilt wall buildings. And like one week I'd just be driving and be like, oh, they're building something. And then by the end of the week, boom, the building's enclosed. It's completely done. Those things go up so fast.
Because it's just a structural outer frame with these massive trusses. They don't have any real interior supports. It's just an open, flexible space that you can do anything. You can create any sort of interior space in, whether it's office buildings with cubicles, whether it's an Amazon facility or some other fulfillment center. It's just so versatile.
Yeah, it's like Le Corbusier's open floor plan using the pilotis columns.
But the problem with those buildings is it's quite bland. They have these fake windows on the outside. They create certain grooves and all to create some variation on the outer surface, but they are quite boring. So if we come up with something like this, like with polyurethane forms and stains, and we can create some interesting facades that blend in with the residential buildings around them.
And change the scale, because every time you think of tilt wall, you think of these massive warehouses. And I think of tilt wall, that method of construction, being so cheap and efficient that it would be great to have that as a residential application. But people don't want that type of building. They don't want a box with a flat roof as their house. As much as you see on the internet of people liking all these modern designs and stuff, traditional homes are what wins. That's what people actually want.
So if we could scale that technology down, but make it look like traditional construction,
it's a win-win.
So in addition to tilt wall buildings, I think another excellent application for Nawkaw's masonry finishes is historic preservation. And they explained this when we were over there at their facility.
Yeah, that's something that I never even really thought about, but it makes perfect sense. They even talked about certain areas where they were trying to match a brick, but the brick was discolored in specific areas. So they went on site and matched those colors and stained it to look exactly like the existing brick. It's really beautiful.
And that's what was so great about the tour. It made me appreciate the work they're doing and realize that it's an art. It's not just, you can't just turn off your brain and paint the entire surface and call it done. There are subtle variations to it. It's not something that can be done in a lab, done in like rendered out and you figure out what's done on site. They're making decisions on site to make it look organic and natural. And they also take sunlight into account and the way the sun hits different facades. So they approach a southern facade differently than they would a northern or an eastern facade, just because of the appearance.
Yeah, they're like the Bob Ross of buildings. It seems like they should just go to art schools and hire the art majors, because they even had you do a demonstration of this, of mixing a few different stains together to try to match a certain color.
And it was difficult because I had to 3 attempts and I wasn't successful at all.
And that's what they do. They send their guys out to the field, and this is mostly with existing construction or historic preservation. They send their guys out to the field to match the color, and they're artists.
And they have so many different types of products. When it's new construction, then they could go for a different type of approach where it's just 2 or 3 layers and they're more consistent.
And they had some beautiful examples of that as well. They also had things like metallic finishes and pearlescent finishes. I was looking at that and I was like, is that foil? is that a metal building? No, it's concrete. It's really amazing what they can do.
So there's an image right behind you. It says Nawkaw Metallics. So that's a new construction. And what's beautiful about that is they kind of made the metal look flat, and they made concrete look like metal. It looks shiny and it has this pattern to it. It's flipping the script. It just blows my mind. It's just they're playing with concrete. They're playing with the appearance of concrete and taking it to another level.
It requires some, because they just make the stain products and they're experimenting with new finishes and things like that, but it also requires the architect or the designer to come up with these unique patterns and ideas. And so there needs to be more of that exploration done.
Yeah, so they work with architects and interior designers and all that to constantly develop new products. And it was fascinating. It was a really cool visit.
I'm really excited about their future and how they grow. And hopefully they overtake the perception that painting your brick is good.
I'm sure there are paints out there that are breathable and do not affect the performance of brick. And I would love to visit a facility to balance my perception right now, because I am quite biased towards stains after visiting Nawkaw's facility and doing the research that I have.
Yeah, it would be great if enough people listened to this podcast to where someone could actually refer us to a quality brick painting company or product that has a proven track record, and then you could research it, because you need that other side of this, because right now that video is going to be very one-sided.
Maybe paints are great too. I don't want to say that. So and it's good to see both sides of an argument. It helps you create an unbiased stance on topics, even if it's staining and painting bricks. So thanks again to Nawkaw for inviting us to their facility in Georgia. Watch out for a video on paints versus brick stains out on my other channels soon. Join us next week for another episode on building science, products, and technology.